There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart. Not with noise, not with drama, but with a soft realization that what you're holding on to is slowly holding you back. Most people never notice these moments. They stay busy. They stay distracted. They keep carrying what is already too heavy, and they wonder why healing never arrives. This story is about one of those moments, the kind that doesn't shout, but waits. In a quiet valley where days passed slowly and nights felt longer than they should, there lived a man named Eamon Hale. From the outside, his life looked steady, predictable, almost peaceful, but inside him lived something unresolved, a weight he refused to put down, a past he believed he needed to protect. This is a story about what happens when holding on stops working, and letting go becomes the bravest thing a person can do. Eamon Hale woke before the sun, not because I needed to, but because he always had. The valley outside his window was still wrapped in shadow, the kind that made the world feel unfinished. He lay there for a moment, listening. Wind brushing against grass, a distant animal call, silence stitched together by routine. He rose, washed his face with cold water, and dressed without thought. Every movement had been practiced so often it no longer belonged to him. His hands knew what to do even when his mind stayed elsewhere, somewhere behind his eyes, where old memories lived like furniture no one sat on anymore. Eamon was known as a reliable man, steady, grounded, the kind people trusted without asking why. In the small valley town, reliability passed for peace. If a man showed up on time, worked quietly, and caused no trouble, people assumed he was doing fine. But peace is not the same as rest. Each morning Eamon walked the same narrow path along the hillside. Dew dampened his boots. The air smelled of earth and something faintly sweet, wildflowers that grew where no one tended them. He paused at the same overlook as he always did, watching the light slowly spill into the valley. This was his moment, the one he never skipped. It wasn't joy that brought him there, it was obligation, a quiet promise he had made years ago and never questioned since. Standing there felt like proof that something remained unchanged, that if he kept returning to this spot, the past might stay intact. Eamon believed strength meant holding on to habits, holding on to memories, holding on to the version of himself that once felt certain. He told himself that letting go was a kind of weakness, a slow forgetting, and forgetting he believed was dangerous. If he released the weight he carried, what would be left of him? What would anchor his days? So he carried it carefully, never examined it too closely, never asked what it cost him. As the sun rose higher, warmth touched his face. Others might have felt gratitude. Eamon felt resolve. Another day accounted for, another promise kept, another step taken without deviation. But beneath the calm surface of his life lived a tension he had grown used to ignoring, a tightness in the chest that came when the world grew too quiet, a heaviness that no amount of discipline seemed to ease. You know this feeling. The feeling of doing everything right and still sensing something is wrong. Of being admired for endurance while slowly growing tired of enduring. Eamon returned home and began his work, moving through the hours with practiced focus. To anyone watching, nothing seemed broken, yet inside him something waited, patient, unresolved, asking a question he refused to hear. How long can a person carry something simply because they always have? That question followed him through the day, though he never named it. It lingered in pauses, in breaths held a moment too long, in the quiet realization that his life, though orderly, felt painfully unfinished, and so the weight remained, unchallenged, unspoken, quiet, but heavy all the same. Eamon believed in effort the way other people believed in luck. If something could be earned, he trusted it. If it could be repeated, he respected it. His days were shaped by small disciplines, simple acts done consistently without drama or complaint. Work began early. He tended what needed tending, repaired what broke, and finished what others left halfway. There was comfort in completion, in visible results, a fence mended, a path cleared, a task crossed off without ceremony. Progress to Eamon was quiet. Over time, these habits built him a reputation. People nodded when he passed. Some asked for help. Others spoke of him with an unspoken admiration, the kind reserved for men who never seemed to falter. He became an example without realizing it, and for a while it felt good. Each small victory reinforced the belief that endurance was the answer, that discipline could hold life together if applied carefully enough. He told himself that as long as he kept moving, kept building, nothing would collapse. But discipline, when used to avoid feeling, becomes a wall. Eamon's strength had been forged during a different season of his life, one shaped by responsibility and loss. Back then, holding on had been necessary. There were things that needed protecting, people who depended on him not to break. So he learned how not to. He learned to work through exhaustion, to swallow disappointment, to replace grief with routine. Those skills served him well until they didn't. Success came in the form of stability, a predictable income, a life that looked intact from the outside. He owned what he needed. He lacked nothing obvious. Yet the more solid his life became, the less room there was for softness. He stopped noticing beauty unless it repeated, stopped asking questions that didn't have answers, stopped wondering who he was becoming. Still, he told himself this was maturity. This was what growing up looked like. The quiet narrowing of expectations, the steady exchange of wonder for control. If he felt something stir inside him, an ache, a longing, he buried it beneath effort. Another task, another improvement, another reason to stay busy. You might recognize this pattern. The belief that if you stay disciplined enough, pain will eventually grow tired and leave. That if you build a strong enough structure, nothing inside you will collapse. But pain doesn't disappear when ignored. It waits. Eamon didn't see the flaw yet. All he saw was progress, evidence that holding on worked, that the weight he carried was useful, even honorable. So he tightened his grip. He planned further ahead, took on more responsibility, reduced his life into things he could manage. Control felt like safety, predictability felt like peace. And in that orderliness, something fragile went unnoticed. The very thing that once gave him strength, his refusal to let go, was slowly teaching him how not to feel alive. But Eamon wasn't ready to see that yet. Not while things still appeared to be working. The fall, when it came, would not arrive with warning, only with truth. The day everything changed began like any other. That was the cruelest part. Eamon followed his routine without resistance. Boots on, tools gathered, the valley breathing slowly beneath a pale morning sky. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing warned him. Life, in its quiet way, gave no signal that it was about to take something back. It happened in the afternoon. A message delivered without urgency. A few simple words spoken by someone who didn't yet understand their weight. The kind of news that rearranges a life in seconds, even though the world around you keeps moving as if nothing has happened. Something Eamon had been holding on to for years, protecting, preserving, building his identity around, was gone. Not damaged, not delayed, gone. There was no dramatic scene, no collapse to the ground, no raised voice. Eamon stood very still as the truth reached him, as if remaining motionless might keep it from settling. His first instinct was practical. What needs to be done? What can be fixed? He asked questions that had no answers, replayed the moment again and again, searching for a detail he could adjust, a choice he could reverse. He believed still in effort, in correction, in discipline as strong enough to undo loss. But this was not a problem. It was an ending. The hours that followed felt unreal. The valley looked the same. The light behaved normally. People spoke to him as they always had. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. A foundation he didn't realize he was standing on had quietly given way. Eamon returned home with the same steady walk, but inside him, the structure he'd built through years of control began to crack. This loss did not respond to strength. It did not improve with patience. It did not care how much he endured. That night he sat alone longer than usual. The silence felt heavier now, not calm but confrontational. Without the thing he'd been holding on to, the weight had nowhere to rest. It pressed inward instead. He told himself this was temporary, that tomorrow he would wake and continue. That discipline had carried him through worse. But a subtle fear crept in, one he hadn't felt in years. What if effort isn't enough this time? You know this moment, the one where you realize the rules you lived by no longer apply, where the strategy that once saved you cannot reach the place you are hurting now. Eamon lay awake that night, staring into the dark, holding on to the last fragments of certainty he had left. His hands were empty, but they were still clenched. And for the first time, the idea of letting go did not feel like weakness. It felt like something he was being forced toward, ready or not. In the days that followed, Eamon behaved as though nothing had ended. He woke at the same hour, walked the same path, stood at the same overlook where the valley slowly filled with light. From a distance, his life remained untouched. Routine held its shape, and to anyone watching, he looked exactly the same. But inside, he was negotiating with reality. He replayed conversations that no longer mattered, reconstructed moments that could not be changed. His mind moved backward with a precision that felt almost disciplined, searching for the point where he might have acted differently, spoken sooner, held tighter. If he could find the mistake, maybe the loss would reverse itself. Denial did not arrive as refusal. It arrived as effort. Eamon convinced himself that holding on a little longer was not the same as resisting truth. He told himself he was honoring what had been lost, protecting its meaning, keeping it alive through memory and loyalty. Letting go, he believed, would turn it into nothing. So he surrounded himself with reminders, objects, places, habits that no longer served a present purpose but anchored him to the past. Each one whispered the same message. If you remember hard enough, it still exists. This was not healing, it was preservation. And preservation is exhausting. At night, guilt joined the silence. Not guilt for what he had done, but for what he couldn't do anymore. For failing to keep something intact simply by caring enough. He told himself stronger people would have found a way. You might recognize this voice, the one that says loss is a personal failure, that if something ended, you must not have been disciplined enough to save it. Eamon's world narrowed. Conversations felt distant. The future felt disloyal. Even moments of relief were followed by shame, as though peace itself were a betrayal. So he clung harder. He held on to routines that no longer fit, to beliefs that no longer protected him, to an identity shaped around something that no longer existed. And beneath all of it lived a quiet fear he refused to speak aloud. If I let go, who am I without it? That question frightened him more than pain ever had. Pain could be endured, emptiness could not. So Eamon stayed where he was, suspended between what had been and what refused to be anymore. Not moving forward, not fully collapsing, just stuck. The valley remained patient. Time continued without permission, and slowly the weight he carried stopped being something he held. It became something that held him. Eventually, even effort grew tired. Eamon stopped pretending he was fine, not outwardly, but inwardly. The routines remained, yet their meaning dissolved. Tasks were completed without satisfaction. Days passed without memory. Time no longer felt like something he moved through, only something that moved over him. He began declining invitations, not out of bitterness, but out of fatigue. Conversation required a version of himself he no longer had the energy to perform. Silence, at least, asked nothing in return. The valley grew quieter, not because the world changed, but because Eamon withdrew from it. Even the overlook lost its power. He still walked there, still watched the sun rise, but the moment felt hollow. The promise he once believed in no longer answered him back. This was not sadness. Sadness still contains feeling. This was emptiness, an absence so complete it felt almost peaceful, until he realized peace does not ache. Emptiness does. At night, sleep came in fragments. His thoughts slowed, then stalled. Without the past to replay and without a future he trusted, his mind rested in a kind of numb suspension. This was the lowest point. Not because of suffering, but because of nothingness. You might know this place, the one where pain fades, but so does meaning. Where you are no longer fighting, but you are no longer living either. Eamon sat one evening at his small table, hands resting where weight once lived. For the first time, he noticed how tired he truly was. Not physically, not mentally. Tired of carrying something that refused to change. Tired of guarding a door that no longer led anywhere. Tired of mistaking endurance for purpose. In that quiet, something inside him loosened, not with intention but with exhaustion. He did not decide to let go. He simply stopped resisting the idea. The silence stretched, deep and unbroken, and in it, a realization formed. Not as a thought, but as a feeling. Holding on had not preserved what he lost. It had only delayed his return to himself. That night, Eamon did not search his memories. He did not plan for tomorrow. He sat with the emptiness and allowed it to be what it was. And for the first time since the loss, the silence did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a threshold. The encounter did not feel important at first. Most turning points don't. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, when the valley was wrapped in that soft, unremarkable light that makes hours blur together. Eamon had taken a longer path than usual, not out of intention, but because the shorter one reminded him too much of who he used to be. Near the edge of the fields, he noticed an old man sitting on a low stone wall. He hadn't seen him there before, or maybe he had and never paid attention. The man's presence was quiet, unannounced, as if he belonged to the land more than to time. They acknowledged each other with a nod, nothing more. Eamon might have kept walking, but something about the stillness held him. Not curiosity, recognition. The old man wasn't waiting, he wasn't watching, he was simply there. "You carry yourself like someone holding something heavy," the man said gently, without looking at it. There was no accusation in the words, no demand for explanation. Eamon felt his throat tighten, surprised by how accurately the sentence landed. He did not respond. He didn't need to. The man continued. "Most people think strength is about grip, about how tightly you can hold on when things pull away." He paused, tracing a finger along the stone beside him. "But some weights aren't meant to be carried forever. Some are meant to teach you when to set them down." The silence that followed felt deliberate, respectful. Eamon sat beside him, unsure why. No advice was offered, no story shared. The man did not ask what had been lost or how long Eamon had been carrying it. He simply said, "If holding on was saving you, it would have worked by now." That was all. No comfort, no instruction, no promise that letting go would feel good. Just truth, spoken without force. You know when something is true, not because it convinces you, but because it stops you from arguing. Eamon sat there for a long time after the man rose and walked away, leaving no name, no farewell. The valley returned to its quiet rhythm, unchanged, but something inside Eamon had shifted. For the first time, he considered a possibility he had been avoiding. What if letting go is not an action, but a permission? That question followed him home, gentle but persistent, not demanding an answer, only asking to be noticed. And that, more than anything, changed the direction of his journey. Letting go did not arrive all at once. It rarely does. For Eamon, it began with something almost invisible. A pause. A moment where he noticed the familiar tightening in his chest and chose not to respond the way he always had. No correction, no distraction, just awareness. He stopped forcing the mornings to mean something. Some days he skipped the overlook, not in defiance, but in honesty. Other days he stood there briefly and left without waiting for reassurance that never came. The ritual loosened its grip, and in that loosening, Eamon felt an unexpected relief. Discipline changed shape. Before, it had been armor, something he wore to avoid breaking. Now, it became care. He slept when he was tired, ate when he was hungry, rested without explaining himself. These were small acts, almost unimpressive, but they carried a quiet dignity. He began removing things from his life that existed only to preserve the past. Objects returned to where they belonged, or were set aside entirely, not erased, just released from duty. Each time he did this, a familiar fear surfaced. If I let this go, will it take everything with it? But nothing collapsed. The world did not punish him for loosening his grip. The valley did not disappear. His identity did not vanish. What faded instead was the constant tension, the vigilance required to keep something alive that no longer needed guarding. Healing did not feel triumphant. It felt humble. There were days when grief returned unexpectedly, sharp and immediate. Eamon learned not to fight it. He let it move through him like weather, arriving, passing, leaving no instruction behind. You might recognize this stage. The one where growth looks suspiciously like weakness, where doing less feels wrong, where rest feels undeserved. But something important was happening beneath the surface. Eamon was no longer trying to control the outcome of his healing. He was participating in it. He stopped asking when he would feel whole again, stopped measuring progress, stopped demanding closure. In its place came a gentler question: what do I need right now? Some days the answer was silence, other days, movement, occasionally connection, always honesty. The weight he had carried for so long did not disappear, it simply lost its authority. It became a memory instead of a burden, a chapter instead of a definition. And though Eamon did not yet feel strong, he felt something new: lightness, not the absence of pain, but the absence of resistance. Growth has a way of being tested when you least expect it. Just when Eamon began to trust the lightness, life reached back for him. Not gently this time. A familiar stress. A reminder of responsibility. A moment that echoed the past closely enough to wake old instincts. Without noticing, his hands clenched again. He caught himself replaying conversations that hadn't happened yet, preparing for outcomes he couldn't control, tightening his schedule, restricting rest. Discipline slipped back into armor so quietly it almost felt responsible. This was the old strength returning, the one that had once saved him and later trapped him. At first it felt comforting, predictable, safe, but the cost revealed itself quickly. Sleep grew restless, his chest tightened the way it used to. The lightness faded, replaced by that familiar pressure, the sense of carrying something heavier than necessary. Eamon noticed it one evening while standing alone, staring at nothing in particular. The realization came softly but clearly. I've been here before. This time, though, he didn't panic. He understood now that letting go was not a single decision. It was a practice, one that will be tested repeatedly, especially when life felt uncertain. Strength, he realized, wasn't proven by never gripping again. It was proven by noticing and choosing differently. So he paused. He loosened his schedule, spoke honestly when he wanted to withdraw, rested without justification, not perfectly, not consistently, but consciously. You know this struggle. The moment you realize healing doesn't mean the absence of old habits, only the presence of awareness when they return. Eamon didn't shame himself for slipping. He didn't interpret it as failure. He saw it for what it was: proof that growth was real enough to be tested. And each time he released his grip again, it came easier. Not because life grew lighter, but because he did. There was no moment where Eamon woke up healed, no sudden clarity, no emotional sunrise. What changed was quieter than that. He began moving through the valley with less urgency, not slower, just softer. His steps no longer carried the weight of proving anything. He worked with care instead of pressure. He listened without preparing replies. He rested without guilt lingering behind his eyes. Purpose returned, but not as a demand. It arrived as presence. Eamon noticed details he had overlooked for years: the way the air cooled just before dusk, the rhythm of his own breath when he stopped controlling it, the comfort of doing something simply because it needed doing, not because it defined him. Peace, he learned, was not the absence of loss, it was the absence of resistance to it. He no longer introduced himself to the world through what he had endured or protected. The past remained, but it no longer spoke for him. He carried it with respect, not obligation. There were still difficult days. Letting go had not erased memory, but memory no longer commanded his choices. It informed them quietly, like a teacher who knows when to step back. You might feel this shift yourself one day, when the thing you feared releasing stops chasing you, when space opens where tension used to live, when your life feels less like something to manage and more like something to inhabit. Eamon found meaning in smaller places now, in consistency without punishment, in discipline that supported peace instead of replacing it, in strength that allowed softness to exist without apology. He did not need to be lighter than others, only lighter than he had been. And as he walked the valley paths, sometimes alone, sometimes not, he realized something that would have frightened his earlier self. Letting go had not made his life smaller, it had made it honest. If this story stayed with you, it's because part of you recognizes Eamon, not his valley, not his routine, but the way he carried something long after it stopped helping him. We are taught to admire endurance, to praise those who hold on no matter the cost. But no one teaches us how to notice when holding on becomes the very thing that keeps us stuck. Letting go is not forgetting. It is not giving up. It is not dishonoring what mattered. Letting go is recognizing when a season has ended and refusing to live inside it forever. Sometimes strength means loosening your grip. Sometimes discipline means rest. Sometimes healing begins when you stop asking pain to justify itself. You don't need to rush this. You don't need to be perfect at it. You only need to notice what you are still carrying out of habit rather than love. The past does not need to be erased to release its weight. Grief does not need to disappear to lose its control, and you do not need to become someone new to walk forward lighter. Like Eamon, you are allowed to set things down. You are allowed to change how you define strength. You are allowed to choose peace without explaining yourself. If this story helped you breathe a little easier, let it reach someone else who is still carrying too much. Like it. Share it. Stay here a while. And remember, healing doesn't begin when everything makes sense. It begins the moment you decide you don't have to hold on anymore.